Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Upaya Cloud Zendo for those of you who are tuning in on YouTube Live right now, and welcome to the Buddhist Chaplaincy Training Program, Cohort 14, who's gathered with us tonight in a mini group via Zoom. We're all here together in community to practice and to join Sensei Alan Senauke, who's going to be guiding us in a Dharma talk tonight called Changing Culture and the Fire This Time. And the Buddhist chaplain students who gathered today for their first day of training, we had a beautiful day of teachings with Sensei Alan and also Rabbi Joanna Katz on spiritual formation. So Sensei Alan, this is a beautiful way to conclude this day with you. And I'd love to do the honors to read your bio. And I must also remember to introduce myself because I often forget to do that. My name is Mary Remington. I'm the director of the Buddhist Chaplaincy Training Program for Upaya. Sensei Alan Senauke is abbot of Berkeley Zen Center in California, where he lives with his family. As a socially engaged Buddhist activist, Alan has worked closely with Buddhist Peace Fellowship and the International Network of Engaged Buddhists since 1991. In 2007, he founded Clear View Project, developing Buddhist-based resources for relief and social change in Asia and the US. In another realm, Alan has been a student and performer of American traditional music for more than 50 years. Alan, it's a great pleasure to have your company and your voice this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary, and greetings, everyone. Greetings to Roshi, and hi to Noah, and I'm looking around at your faces, and greetings to everyone in the Zendo. It's a small but dedicated crew, and I'm sorry that you're encountering some COVID infections in your midst. It's really hard. It's just drags on and on. And greetings everyone out there live streaming. So I wanted to start, let me just start with a photograph if I can. And this will be my point of departure. So I assume you can see that. That is a photograph that I took at noon on an October day in 2020. Photograph from the shore of the bay, looking out at the Berkeley Pier. And it was a day when the whole Bay Area was blanketed with smoke from massive fires that were burning all around us. And I've never seen a day like that here, with this kind of hellish cast to the light. It's completely unretouched. So this is the fire that this is a literal actualization of the fires that we are living with, of the fire this time, if you will. This is nothing new. The Buddha, 2,500 years ago, the Buddha said that everything is burning. It's burning with the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. And this has always been the case. And now the fires are both figurative and literal. In the grip of our species, greed, hatred, and delusion, we're destroying our own world. We're killing each other by poisoning the environment. by waging war, by making and selling weapons, and by broadcasting the fear that we have of people that we perceive as different from us. So these fires are burning. This week, we remember the fires that rose in a great ball following the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki 77 years ago on August 6th and August 9th, 1945. In the immediate blasts, more than 130,000 people were immediately incinerated. And many, many more died in the next few weeks, and hundreds of thousands in the years to come. And now we live with those dangers. We live with the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We live with battles being fought over in the Ukraine. We live with saber rattling between the US and China this week over Taiwan. And we live with the ongoing fires of racism and of this pernicious habit of othering people when there really is no other. So that's all really sobering. We also live, with the celebration of our being alive, with the celebration of our practice, thinking of the energy and joy that we conjured together today in our chaplaincy practice. As long as we're alive, there's an opportunity. As long as we're alive, there's an opportunity to continue life, to experience joy, and to change. So I wanted to talk about something that we're doing here at Berkeley Zen Center and tie it into what I understand to be the history of Buddhism. For more than a year, or actually close to 2 years, a group of us at Berkeley Zen Center, which includes a number of the senior students and also practitioners from BIPOC communities that practice with us. Some of us are meeting weekly to explore what we have come to call culture change in our now, for some people in the Sangha, culture change is itself a kind of triggering word, triggering expression. It's like, what's wrong with our culture? What's wrong with the teaching? Is there something wrong with the teachings that we've been passed by Suzuki Roshi and Sojin Roshi? No, not exactly. But if we look at what's been unfolding in our country for a very long time, but really acutely in the last few years, we see that some change is needed in our communities. Some changes are needed in our sanghas themselves. And I will say that I think that the work that we're looking at is in line with what I find is happening in sanghas all over the United States. Uh, each in their own way are taking up the work of looking at our unconscious bias, looking at the difficulties we have in how we interact with each other across cultural, ethnic, racial lines, and recognizing that uh, it's not that there's something missing in our practice. It's just we need to find a way to dig deeper, because the practice is really about looking at ourselves and being free from our habitual behaviors. So, what we're doing, after consulting with a number of teachers and a number of sanghas, uh, we found that the Soto Zen Buddhist Association was offering an online uh, process of community inquiry and study. It's called Many Communities, One Sangha, exploring the realities of equity and inclusion. And this was developed in partnership with Soto Zen Buddhist Association uh, by uh, several teachers. Uh, some of you may know Rhonda McGee, who has been a student at Upaya, uh, Mushi Mikeda, who was one of the leaders of the East Bay Meditation Center, Crystal Johnson, who's a teacher at East Bay Meditation Center, and it was designed to be to energize sanghas and practitioners who want to create more equitable and inclusive communities. It's a self-guiding curriculum with extensive resources and really good structure. And in our case, what we've done is after talking quite a bit with Rhonda McGee, we decided that we would, if she were available, we raised money so that we're alternating our small group sessions with in-person training sessions with Rhonda. And we're about to begin this. We're beginning this in late October. And I think the first year is probably going to stretch over about 8 months of practice. And we have the capacity to include about 25 or 30 people in this process. And then we'll review, reconsider, revise, and do another year. So this is very practically what we're doing. And in part, we're doing it because I and others in our Sangha have witnessed really uncomfortable interactions with Sangha members, with people of color, or between even with Sangha leaders and people of color. And because in quiet discussions with people of color in our community, what we find is not just that this is an everyday condition of the life that they meet in the streets and in work, but it happens here. It happens in small ways, and it's because of their devotion and dedication to practice is what allows them to stay. I don't want to be doing this. And I know that I carry the same, uh, I carry unconscious biases myself. I have unconsciously made some slips with all the good intentions that I might have that just made me realize I was a person whole. I was seeing them on the basis of uh, who I thought them to be instead of taking each person fresh and new, which is the way we should encounter people, which is the way that in our chaplaincy training, it's the attitude that we have to have in each encounter that we may undertake with a patient, with a person in a prison, uh, in whatever setting you're working, to approach it with curiosity and integrity, and to get our habits and biases out of the way if we want to have a real relationship. So again, as I said, this idea of culture change has uh, been controversial here, and there's some pushback that we get. But historically, to me, Buddhism has always been about culture change from the very beginning. In ancient India, what the Buddha established in his Sangha was an overturning of older patterns of community that existed in his time and place. He created a community that was open to people, and quite explicitly, you can find the chapter and verse speaking about not being closed to caste, speaking about who is truly a Brahmin, not a Brahmin by birth, but a Brahmin by action. Speaking to issues of the diversity of color, and of course, opening the Sangha to women, to create a context for women to ordain as nuns. That was fully realized in the Buddha's time. And I will say, in the kind of with the tide of patriarchy reversed that in many places in Asia, not all. In some places, in North Asia and some other pockets, full ordination for women continued. And in other places, it was steadily and repressed, but it's coming back. So this is, the Buddha was changing the culture, and that culture stayed changed for hundreds of years. When you go to India, it's really fantastic to visit the Buddhist caves, which were monasteries, and you see that they had these fantastic institutions. They had universities. They had a Buddhist culture for many, many years, hundreds of years. In China, what evolved that changed the culture? So in India, one of the difficulties that faced institutional Buddhism was that the practice seemed to belong to the monks and nuns, and the practice of the role of lay people was to support them. And that became onerous, that became difficult. But in China, what they came upon, which was another culture change, was that monasteries would be relatively self-sustaining. They were often built in remote places, and the monks worked. They grew their own food, they cooked their own food, and they created a an equitable society for themselves in those places. And they also, what they did with culture is that over a period of several centuries, they translated Buddhism into accessible cultural forms. They translated it literally into Chinese, but also into something that was really resonant with Chinese culture. So that's a culture change. The other thing that evolved in China and in Japan was that you had the evolution of home practice, of lay practice. So people brought the practice home. They had altars in their own homes and performed their own intimate rituals and rites and could meditate on their own. And they were supported by the institutions of Buddhism. And this is still true in China and in Japan. In Japan, you had the continuation of those kinds of institutional changes that evolved in China. But more recently, what you see that's directly relevant to work that we're doing now is from the early 70s, there was a human rights movement that grew up in Buddhism, in Japanese Buddhism. You had a whole class, an underclass or untouchable caste of people in Japanese culture called Burakumi. And Burakumi, the term actually means, is also referred to as eta hinin. And eta means polluted or unclean. And hinin means non-person. So this is very much like the Dalit in India. This is very much like the kind of racism that people of African American background face in the United States. And while it was illegal, it was very widespread, and a lot of the infrastructure of it was built into the Buddhist temples, because the Buddhist temples functioned as sort of the outpost of civil society up until the 19th century. So you had like we have the Black Lives Movement, you had a Burakumi liberation organization that demonstrated and lobbied among the Buddhist institutions in Japan. And what they enacted were legal changes, and also structural and legal changes within those Buddhist institutions themselves. And they also instituted, and I was really surprised to see this when I was training in Japan, there's the requirement that in the monastery, in the training monasteries, every year, the monks have to go for a human rights training. and they leave the temple, they gather together, and they're given a pretty rigorous human rights training. So all of this is culture change. This is the kind of work that we're being asked to do. Here in the U.S., you know, in some of the Buddhist countries, uh, Buddhism is the mainstream culture, and it is aligned with the state, and also it's part of a culture that's relatively uh, homogeneous. Uh, this is not the reality that we have with Buddhism, which I'm really happy about. We're not fundamentally aligned with the state or the government, so we're free of those ties. And the challenge that we have is the challenge of realizing equality in a diverse culture. And that means, to me, uh, Buddhism is new here, right? And and actually, all of our teachers predicted that it would adapt and change, in the sense that it had to do that in China and Japan and everywhere that it proliferated. Uh, my teacher Sojin Roshi uh, said very early on that he expected it would change. Now that said, he, as much as he could, he valued the teachings that he had received from his teacher and transmitted that to us. But we have to see, how do we bring this forward? This is true for each of us. You know, I will say, for me, the model of practice is quite related to how I learned music. I play traditional music, mostly American folk musics from the southern part of our country, which is not where I was born. I was born in New York. But I heard this music and it completely came to life for me. I found Zen and it completely came to life for me. And in both those cases, what I did was, okay, first, I'd read everything that I could. I would listen to all the recordings that I could. And when I had a certain degree of competence and confidence, I also found teachers. I found traditional teachers. And I paid very close attention to them and learned the tradition of Southern musics, learned the tradition of Zen as closely and as traditionally as I could. And, I spent a fair amount of time down south. I played with a lot of musicians. I feel like I could play these musics relatively idiomatically. And I know that there's stuff that I'm missing. But ultimately, what we are doing is not something that's imitative. Ultimately, we have to absorb the teachings of whatever tradition we're in, absorb them as thoroughly as possible, and then transmit them in a way that is authentically ourselves. How do we do that? How do we be truly ourselves? How do I, this is something I've worked with for 40 years, playing these kinds of musics, but recognizing I'm not from the mountain south, recognizing I'm not from uh, Japan in the 16th century or Tang Dynasty China. I have to figure out how to make a practice that is in alignment with the culture that we have. And to me, that's the work of the culture change that we're taking on. And that involves, uh, ultimately, it involves transformation. It involves an internal transformation, which means a very, very close investigation of yourself. And, we're learning this every time we sit down for zazen. Every time we sit down facing the wall, we sit down, we're facing ourselves. And whatever comes up, we accept. But we also can question. We can also be curious about what comes up. So this is our continual work in zazen. It's the internal cultural change that we have to take on. And then it's true of our institutions. Who's in the room? Are there people who are not in the room because we haven't created conditions that welcome them? And also, just like with music, the great advantage of living today is we can be exposed to so much richness, culturally, musically, etc. And the same is true with our spiritual practice. It's not that the white people need to go out and proselytize to people of color, or it's like it's not that we need them in our sanghas to somehow validate ourselves. It's really, what can I learn? What can I learn from what's going on in other communities? How does that dovetail with Zen practice as I'm seeing it? That to me that's like, I'm so interested in that. And for some reason, I've always been interested in that. That's just my predilection. But I think it behooves our communities to be particularly, uh, here we are in Berkeley, we live in the midst of so many different communities, different Buddhist communities, different religious groups, different ethnic groups, and we should be learning from each other. And that doesn't mean just like we bring people in to our practice place. It means we go out and practice with them. We find out what's going on in churches and synagogues. For about 6 months last year, I was doing Bible study. I went to Bible study at a Black evangelical church online, and it was really interesting. And they were, I think they thought I was strange, but I was totally welcome, and formed. When you do that, when you go out to these places, relationships form, and those relationships endure. We have a relationship with a mosque. We have a relationship with some of the churches and synagogues. So all of this is culture change. It may have been that my teacher and his teacher had to hunker down and really dig in to plant the seed of a practice. So that seed is planted. We're pretty stable here. We've been around now for 55 years in Berkeley Zen Center. And I think we'll be around longer, although all of us may disappear tomorrow. But now we can do the work of reaching out. We can do the work of broadening. And we can truly make our zazen, what my teacher used to say is like, zazen, in zazen, you should include everything. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do. And that's what I would encourage you to do. I know that's the work that is also going on at Upaya. And just to be encouraged that this is going on in many places around the country. And I would invite you all to be part of that opening, part of that waking, part of that really broad, wholehearted practice. So I think I'll stop there. Do we have time for some questions and answers? I don't know how it works. What do you think, Mary?
I think we might have time for maybe just
I can't hear you.
one.
You're muted.
Am I? I think we have time maybe for just one question. I think we
I see
typically
some people
close.
nodding their heads, but I'm still not hearing Mary. She's the boss.
Can you all hear me?
Can
you all hear me? Okay.
She's holding up a finger, which I don't know what that means.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, but Alan can't hear me. So, Alan.
Are other people hearing her?
Yes.
You are?
Yes.
I'm not hearing you. Oh, I know why. Try again.
Yeah, there we go.
My speaker went out. Okay.
All right. I was just saying, I think we have time for maybe just one question, Alan.
Okay.
And let's see. Hear from our chaplain students. Is there anyone that wants to ask a question before we come to a close tonight?
Hi, Roshi.
Great to see you.
So don't be shy. Even though there's only one question, one person should ask it.
Well, Alan, I just want to express my appreciation for you talking about culture change and also about the transformations in Buddhism as Buddhism has moved from area to area. And we're in a very important time in the development of Buddhism. And also as Buddhism moves, from the West back to Asia. I'd love you to just reflect a bit about that phenomenon, because I think it's awfully interesting what's happening in Asian Buddhism.
Right. I think you and I know about that. So there's an interesting feedback loop. The feedback loop is we've been here for a while, and people from some of the Asian Buddhist communities are coming back and forth between the United States and Asia. And what they're seeing is a very live Buddhism. So here's an example. I spent time on Sunday. We have zazen every day online, and we also are in person. We now have a group of people from a Dalit community in Kerala, India, who sit with us every day. And those people are interested, it's like they're interested in our style of Zen. So on their altar, they have a picture of the Buddha, a picture of Dr. Ambedkar, a picture of Suzuki Roshi, and a picture of my teacher, Sojin Roshi. And I am helping them establish a practice, and I'm not proselytizing. It's like they came to this themselves. So that's an example. We also see what's happening here is affecting Soto Zen in Japan. There's tremendous interest from the younger generation in this. And I think we have these feedback loops going. I also see it in the context of the International Network of Engaged Buddhists, where we're connected around the world. So yes, what happens here makes a difference. And this is, I'll just say, this is parallel also to uh, a cultural feedback loop that I've seen. For example, I play Louisiana Cajun music. Cajun culture was dying by the 60s and 70s, and there were a few elder performers and musicians who were keeping it alive. They were engaged with younger musicians like myself and my friends who really were excited by the music and who began to play it, who began to come down to Louisiana, and all of a sudden this music and this culture is completely alive again. So we have the capacity to renew rather than lose, to renew and to make it new in the context of our society and in context of values that we want.
Thanks, Alan. I think that's really important, because issues related to gender, race, and even social roles. For example, we had a Vietnamese nun live with us at Upaya for some years who did our chaplaincy training. You remember her well, Pearl. And the notion of a chaplain is really not there in the Vietnamese Buddhist context. And she's forging a new path in that context as a result of this training. And so I'm very interested in these bequests that of high mutuality between the East and West that are unfolding at this time.
Yeah, and that can only help all concerned. It helps us. We learn, we benefit from this contact, and they do. This is a good kind of globalization.
Yeah, very exciting. And even the role of chaplain, for example, in the Western context, which has been primarily associated with Christianity, but now there are hundreds of Buddhist chaplains, at least 100 coming out of our training. And there are, of course, other Buddhist chaplain trainings that are really turning chaplaincy into something that is quite different than the more narrow way it was enacted, say, 20 years ago. So it's very exciting.
So all of you are pioneers, and give freely of yourselves, please. So it looks like it's probably, oh no, you're not even there. You guys in the Zendo, it's time for dinner. The rest of you, I hope you enjoy your evening. Is there a chance to close?
Yes.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Sensei Alan. Thank you so much.
I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Be well, everyone.